Coming in as latest news with regards to the upcoming Brics summit in South Africa are related preparations to ensure a peaceful ground and summit deliberations. South Africa's president, and Russia as part of a delegation pushing for peace between Kyiv and Moscow, told his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, on Saturday that the fighting in Ukraine had to stop. The delegation put forth a set of principles that the Kremlin deemed very difficult to implement, a day after Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky ruled out talks with Moscow. The delegation brought the voice of a continent that has badly suffered from repercussions of the Ukraine conflict, particularly with rising grain prices. Almost every country around the globe has suffered increment in prices of foods and commodities ever since the Ukraine-Russia war. South Africa's Cyril Ramaphosa said after talks in the suburbs of St. Petersburg, and I quote, "This war must be settled through negotiations and through diplomatic means." Russian authorities have effectively banned the word war to describe their military operation in Ukraine. Ramaphosa outlined 10 principles, which included de-escalation, the recognition of countries' sovereignty, security guarantees for all countries, unimpeded grain exports through the Black Sea, and sending prisoners of war and children back to their countries of origin. This mission, which included the presidents of South Africa, Senegal, Comoros, and Zambia, as well as top officials from Uganda, Egypt, and Congo-Brazzaville, was all aimed at making Putin see the reasons to put the war to an end. Let's find out if this suggestion will be implemented by Putin. Talk of implementing this. Any initiative is very difficult to implement. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov was quoted as saying by the state-run agency RIA Novosti, but President Putin has shown interest in considering it, Peskov said after the leaders held a meeting behind closed doors. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said the plan was not formulated on paper. Putin had praised the delegation's balanced approach and said he was open to a constructive dialogue with all those who want to implement peace based on the principles of justice and respect for the party's legitimate interests. But why is South Africa's president pressing on Putin for an end of war in Ukraine? South African president says the war is having a negative impact on the African continent and many other countries. To him, a prolonging of the Ukraine war will only leave devastation repercussions on Africa and other countries if not brought to an end sooner. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, who was in Russia as part of a peace-seeking delegation, told his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin that the war in Ukraine must stop. What were Putin's views prior to the African leader's suggestions to end Ukraine war? Putin interrupted opening remarks by African leaders seeking to mediate in the Ukraine conflict to deliver a list of reasons why he believed many of their proposals were misguided. He further reiterated his position that Ukraine and the West had started the conflict long before Russia sent its armed forces over the border in February last year. He said Russia had never refused talks with the Ukrainian side, which had been blocked by Kyiv. What about Ukrainian President Zelensky's terms after meeting with the African leaders in the peace talks? Ukraine's leader said after meeting the leaders that peace talks with Russia would be possible only after Moscow withdrew its forces from occupied Ukrainian territory. "We have come to listen to you and through you to hear the voice of the Russian people," said Comoros President Azali Assoumani, who currently heads the African Union, told Putin. "We wanted to encourage you to enter into negotiations with Ukraine. African countries have been divided over opinions in their response to the conflict, with some siding with Ukraine, while others have remained neutral or gravitated towards Moscow." During their meeting with Zelensky, the Ukraine president requested the African leaders push Putin to release political prisoners as a confidence-building measure. Referring to prisoners of war, Putin said on Saturday, "We are ready to continue this process." In Ukraine, Russian and Ukrainian officials in the area devastated by flooding from the destruction of a Russian-held dam announced revised death toll Saturday. The toll in Russian-held areas had risen to 29, officials there said. Kyiv said the number killed in its territory had risen to 16, with 31 still missing, and warned that the threat of airstrikes remains high across Ukraine. In Washington, U.S. President Joe Biden warned that the United States would not make special arrangements for Ukraine to join the NATO military alliance. "They've got to meet the same standards," he told reporters, "so we're not going to make it easy." What we need to know is currently happening at the battlefield. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu on Saturday called for more tanks to be manufactured to meet the needs of Russian forces in Ukraine after Kyiv launched a counteroffensive with Western arms. Shoigu, who visited a military factory in western Siberia, stressed the need to maintain the increased production of tanks and better security features in armored vehicles, the defense ministry said. Russia claims the Ukrainian counteroffensive has failed, but Kyiv says it has retaken several localities and about 100 square kilometers of territory, mainly on the southern front. Prior to the peace talks by African presidents, Zelensky has rejected any deal that entails Ukraine ceding territory to Russia, and Putin is unlikely to agree to conditions for a troop withdrawal. Ukraine wants peace more than anyone, but we won't achieve diplomacy with Russia while they are on our territory, Zelensky said Friday after meeting the African leaders. In response, Senegal President Macky Sall said that when you're fighting, you still probably need to have place for a dialogue. No one enjoys fighting any losing its people and country's assets. Let's take a look at the seeking of neutrality. The African states join France and China and are among those spearheading separate interventions to try and bring an end to the war, which will soon hit the 16-month mark. Just about half of Africa's 55 nations voted in favor of United Nations resolutions condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine, while most of the rest abstained as a way to stay neutral toward the biggest European conflict since World War II. Africa and the rest of the developing world have been severely affected by the conflict, which disrupted trade and pushed up prices for grain and fertilizer. This week, Putin hinted that Russia may quit a deal brokered last summer by Turkey and the United Nations, allowing Ukraine to ship grains from Black Sea ports safely. How has this war affected South Africa's position as Brics' upcoming summit host? We will be back on more on economic and geopolitical issues happening around the globe only on Cracked Info. Do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel if you are just new to the channel. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more on economic and related geopolitics and international relations around the globe. See you soon.